The forbidden Glenn Miller record dropped. Moonlight Serenade, American jazz, crackling through camp speakers like smuggled sin. Karen Volker froze mid-step, then shattered. Laughter exploded from her chest, hysterical, body shaking, morphing into sobs that doubled her over, tears soaking the borrowed dress. She clutched the Scottish fisherman's shirt, gasping, happy. For the first time since her father's belt cracked across her back for daring to hum swing tunes in secret. Bombs had fallen on Hamburg that night, glass shattering, neighbors screaming as buildings crumbled, no music, only sirens and death. Now, this, rhythm pulling her feet, his hand on her waist, enemies swaying to Yankee beats. She laughed through the tears. First time since 12. What broke the hate wide open in a freezing Scottish POW camp? The truck hit another pothole and Lotta Drescher's head cracked against the metal ribbing. She didn't flinch. 22 other bodies pressed against her in the darkness, all of them past feeling. 3 days since Norway. 2 days since they'd eaten. 1 day since anyone had spoken. The youngest nurse, Johanna Kruger, whispered the same prayer she'd been repeating for 6 hours. Please fast, please fast, please fast. She wanted to die before they got wherever they were going. Lotta had heard stories from returning soldiers, the ones who came back from seeing Belsen, who couldn't look nurses in the eye anymore, if the British did to them what the camps had done. The truck stopped. 23 women froze. Through the gaps in the canvas, Lotta saw gray mountains, rain, a guard's boots splashing through mud. Out, someone said in accented German. Shower first, then mess hall. Shower. The word landed like a stone in water. Helga Bachmann grabbed Lotta's wrist. Her fingers were ice. They gas us in showers, she breathed. The Jews. They told us. Quiet, Lotta hissed, but her own hands were shaking. They climbed down into September cold that knifed through their thin Wehrmacht auxiliary uniforms. The camp looked like every other POW facility. Wire fences, wooden buildings, guard towers. Except the guards were watching them with something Lotta couldn't name. Not hatred, not pity. Curiosity, maybe. Like they were trying to figure something out. The showers were actual showers, hot water, soap that smelled like lavender. Lotte stood under the spray for 3 minutes waiting to choke, waiting for gas, waiting for anything except this impossible warmth. When nothing happened, she started crying so quietly no one else could hear. They gave the women clean clothes, British uniforms, dyed gray, too big but dry. Then a guard, maybe 19, red hair, freckles like paint spatters, gestured toward a long wooden building. Mess hall, he said in broken German. Eat now. Lotta's stomach had been empty so long it had stopped hurting. She filed in with the others expecting, what? Bread crusts, watery, soup, punishment rations for war criminals. The smell hit her first. Meat, roasting meat, fat dripping onto hot metal. The scent was so rich it made her dizzy. The mess hall had long tables already set, 23 places, each with a real plate, real utensils, and on every plate. Lotta stopped walking. The nurses behind her stumbled to a halt, a human pile-up of disbelief. Sunday roast. Full Sunday roast. Beef glistening with juice. Yorkshire pudding rising golden from a pool of dark gravy. Roasted potatoes with crispy edges. Carrots glazed with butter. More food on one plate than Lotta had seen in a week, in a month. In 4 years of rationing and war. Sit, a Scottish guard said, not unkindly. He was older, maybe 40, with sergeant's stripes. Eat before it gets cold. No one moved. Johanna was staring at her plate like it might explode. Helga had both hands over her mouth. Karen Volker made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. Lotta walked to her designated seat, sat down, looked at the beef. It was real. She'd treated soldiers who'd lost limbs, who'd bled out in her arms, who'd screamed for mothers who would never come. She'd worked 30-hour shifts, She'd sewn men back together with gut and wire. She hadn't cried once. She picked up the beef with her fingers, lifted it to her nose. The smell broke something inside her chest. Last time she'd eaten meat like this, her husband was still alive. Her apartment in Hamburg still had windows. Her patients still had a chance. The tears came hot and fast, dripping off her chin onto the gravy. She couldn't stop them, didn't try. She bit into the beef. It was tender, seasoned with rosemary and salt, cooked perfectly, pink in the middle, charred at the edges. The fat melted on her tongue. She chewed slowly, crying the whole time, tasting 4 years of hunger ending in one impossible bite. Around her, the other nurses were breaking down. Johanna vomited into her napkin. Too much richness, empty stomach. Helga was shaking so hard her fork clattered against her plate. Karen just sat there with tears streaming down her face, not even trying to eat. Lotta swallowed, looked up. The red-haired guard, Private something, she couldn't remember, was watching her from across the room. He was young enough to be her son, young enough to have a mother somewhere who fed him roast on Sundays. Their eyes met. He walked over. Lotta tensed, waiting for the trick, the punishment, the "this is what you can't have" cruelty. He picked up the serving spoon from a nearby platter, added more beef to her plate. 3 thick slices, still steaming. Lotta stared at the meat, at his hands, at his face. He had freckles across his nose, a small scar on his chin, eyes the color of storm clouds. "My brother died at Arnhem," he said quietly in English. She understood enough. "Paratrooper, 21 years old." Lotta's throat closed. The guard's voice stayed level. "He got shot in the stomach. Took him 2 days to die. Maybe someone like you tried to save him. Maybe not." He set the spoon down. "But you're here now, and you're hungry, so eat." He walked away before she could respond. Lotta looked at the beef he'd given her, at this boy whose brother she might have treated as an enemy, whose brother had died the same hard death as so many men she'd failed to save. She whispered, "Danke," to the empty air. Then again, and again. 23 times while she ate, tears falling into her gravy, mixing salt with the rich brown sauce. The beef tasted like forgiveness she didn't deserve and couldn't refuse. Around her, 22 other women slowly, carefully, began to eat. The morning after the roast beef, Lotte woke to frost patterns on the Nissen hut's curved metal walls. Her stomach ached, not from hunger, but from being full. She'd forgotten that sensation. A Scottish guard knocked. "Visitors today. Local folk approved by the colonel." The nurses dressed in silence. Borrowed British uniforms, still too large, sleeves rolled 3 times. Helga Bachmann sat on her bunk staring at her hands. Those hands had changed SS bandages, extracted shrapnel from boys wearing Death's Head insignia. She told herself it was just nursing, just keeping people alive. The lie tasted like ash now. In the mess hall, 37 Scottish civilians filed in. Most came to stare. Lotta could see it in their faces. Enemies made flesh. Monsters in uniform. An elderly man spat on the floor near Karen's feet. 2 women pointed and whispered behind their hands. Then Mrs. Fiona Campbell walked through the door. She was 58, gray hair pulled tight, wearing a wool coat that had seen better decades. She carried a battered leather suitcase that looked heavy enough to contain rocks. Her face was carved granite, deep lines around her mouth, eyes that had cried themselves dry. She walked straight to Helga. No hesitation, no circling, just direct movement across the concrete floor, her shoes clicking like a countdown. Helga stood, her chair scraped backward. Mrs. Campbell set the suitcase on the table between them. The latches clicked open with sounds like breaking bones. Inside, 6 hand-woven tartan blankets, folded with military precision, smelling of heather and peat smoke. The older woman lifted one, blues and greens woven into a pattern older than the war, and draped it across Helga's shoulders. The weight of it, the warmth. Helga's knees buckled. "My boys would have frozen like you're freezing." Mrs. Campbell said in German so rough it had to have been practiced, memorized, forced through grief. I won't have that. Helga tried to push it away. Her hands shook. I nursed the SS. I don't deserve. You nursed boys somebody loved. Mrs. Campbell's voice cut like wire. That's enough. Helga collapsed into her chair. The tartan pooled around her like water, like forgiveness she couldn't process. She pulled it tight and sobbed, ugly, crying that shook her whole body. The other nurses watched. The Scottish visitors watched. Nobody moved. Mrs. Campbell sat down across from her, pulled knitting needles from her coat pocket, started a new pattern without asking permission. The next Saturday, she came back, and the Saturday after that. By the fourth visit, she brought a small loom, set it up in the corner of the common room where sunlight leaked through the high windows, showed Helga how to warp the threads, how Scottish sheep's wool held patterns German hands had never touched. Helga's fingers were clumsy at first. She dropped the shuttle twice. Mrs. Campbell's weathered hands guided hers, teaching, correcting, patient as stone. My oldest was James, Mrs. Campbell said one afternoon in late October. Rain drummed on the metal roof. Dunkirk took him, shot through the chest on the beach. His friend wrote me, said he called for me at the end. Helga's shuttle stopped mid-throw. My youngest was Robert. North Africa. Landmine. They sent me his wedding ring. She kept weaving, her pattern never faltering. Hadn't even married yet. Just carried it for luck. The loom clicked. Threads tightened. I hated you, Mrs. Campbell said. Simple. Factual. Every one of you. Wanted you to starve. Wanted you to hurt like I hurt. Helga couldn't breathe. But Robert's last letter, he wrote about a German nurse in a field hospital. They'd captured her near Tobruk. She'd set a British soldier's broken leg, used her own splint. He said she cried the whole time because she had no morphine to give him. Mrs. Campbell's hands paused. He said she was just a girl, terrified, doing what she could. The rain intensified. Thunder rolled across the highlands. I don't know if that was you, Mrs. Campbell continued. Don't matter. She was somebody's daughter. You're somebody's daughter. My boys. Her voice cracked for the first time. My boys would have wanted me to be better than my hate. Helga set down her shuttle, reached across the loom. Their hands met in the space between warp and weft, enemy and grieving mother, weaving something new from broken threads. A local journalist visited 2 weeks later. He found them working side by side, Helga's tartan pattern finally holding steady. The camera flash popped. The photo ran in the Oban Times. Enemy nurse learns Scottish craft from war mother. The backlash was immediate. Letters to the editor called Mrs. Campbell a traitor. Someone threw a rock through her cottage window. At church, 3 families refused to sit near her. She kept visiting, brought more wool, more patterns, started teaching Karen and Johanna too. The corner of the common room became a makeshift weaving workshop. German hands learning Scottish traditions, creating blankets that would warm beds in both countries. One afternoon in November, Mrs. Campbell arrived with newspapers, spread them on the table. They're calling me a Nazi sympathizer, she said, saying I've forgotten my boys. Helga looked up from her loom, threads of blue and green tight between her fingers. I could never forget them, Mrs. Campbell said, but they didn't die so I could become something small and hard. They died fighting hate. I won't dishonor that by hating you. She opened her bag, pulled out a 5th tartan blanket, this one in different colors. Campbell clan pattern, her family's weave for 3 centuries. She handed it to Helga. You're learning well, Mrs. Campbell said. Time you had the real thing to study. Helga held it like holding sacred text, the weight of forgiveness in wool and dye. She pressed it to her face and breathed in Scotland, heather, rain, peat smoke, mercy. 3 guards watching from the doorway looked away. One wiped his eyes. That night, wrapped in Campbell tartan, Helga wrote her first letter home. To her mother in Hamburg, if she still lived. To the ruins of everything she'd known. "I am learning to weave," she wrote. "From a woman whose sons I might have failed to save. She teaches me anyway. I don't understand mercy yet, but I'm learning its patterns." The letter would take 4 months to reach Hamburg. Her mother would respond 6 months after that. By then, Helga would have woven her first complete blanket, Campbell pattern with German precision, and Mrs. Campbell would display it in her cottage window for all of Kilmartin to see. Let them call her a traitor, she was teaching enemies to create warmth. That was revolution enough. The gramophone sat on a folding table in the corner of the camp hall, scratched and dented from the Atlantic crossing. November wind rattled the corrugated metal walls. 37 locals filed through the doorway like mourners at a funeral. Most were women over 50. 3 had canes. None smiled. Colonel Sinclair stood at attention near the entrance, his Glasgow accent cutting through the silence. "Cultural exchange, supervised fraternization, rehabilitation through community." He sounded like he was reading from a manual. Maybe he was. The German nurses lined one wall wearing donated dresses that didn't fit. Johanna's hung loose at the shoulders. Helga's was too tight across the chest. Lotte had pinned hers with safety pins to keep the hem from dragging. Karen Foker stood in the corner farthest from the door. The cream-colored dress came from the Methodist Church donation box. It smelled like mothballs and someone else's perfume. She'd never owned anything this delicate. A Scottish woman with white hair dropped a record onto the gramophone. Glenn Miller's Moonlight Serenade crackled to life. American jazz. Forbidden music. Karen's father would have beaten her for listening. The Kriegsmarine had no time for dancing. She'd spent 22 years never touching music like this. Most locals stayed planted against the opposite wall. A few older men shuffled toward the German women, hands in pockets, making small talk in broken German about weather and farming. Nothing real. The fisherman appeared at Karen's elbow without warning. He was tall, maybe 6 foot, with dark hair graying at the temples. A scar ran from his right ear down his neck, disappearing under his collar. His left ear was the wrong color, waxy and reconstructed. "Dance?" he said. Karen stared at his outstretched hand. The palm was calloused, fingers thick from hauling nets. A wedding ring used to sit on his 4th finger. She could see the pale band of skin. "I don't know how," she whispered in German. He switched to broken German himself. "I teach. Easy. Come." She took his hand because refusing seemed ruder than accepting. His name was Ewan Ross. He'd lost most of his hearing at Monte Cassino when an artillery shell landed 12 feet from his foxhole. The doctors rebuilt his ear but couldn't restore the nerves. He led her to the center of the hall. 6 couples were already moving, stiff, formal, monitored by guards stationed at each corner. "Hand here." Ewan placed her left hand on his shoulder. "Other hand here." He took her right hand in his left. "I lead. You follow. Just walk." The music swelled. He stepped forward. She stepped back. Her foot caught his ankle. She stumbled. He caught her waist. "Sorry," she gasped. My father never—" "Again," Ewan said. "Slow." They tried again. This time she managed 3 steps before her knee locked up, but the 4th time something clicked. The music wrapped around them. Ewan's hand steadied her lower back. Her borrowed dress swished against her calves. They moved in a small circle. Nothing fancy, just a basic box step, but it was movement to music, her body responding to rhythm instead of orders. Halfway through the song, it hit her. She was dancing. She was touching a man gently. She was listening to American jazz in a dress that smelled like roses, and nobody was screaming, and the sky wasn't exploding, and her father wasn't coming through the door with his belt. The laughter started in her chest like hiccups. Then it erupted. Full body, hysterical, shaking her shoulders and doubling her over. She couldn't stop. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the laughter, turning into gasping sobs that might have been joy or grief or both. Ewan stopped moving. His face went confused, then hurt. He started to pull away. Karen grabbed his hand with both of hers, desperate, shaking. 9. No. She switched to broken English, words tumbling out. I am happy. First time happy since I am 12 years old. The entire room had stopped dancing. 20 couples stood frozen, watching the German girl cry-laugh into the Scottish fisherman's chest while Glenn Miller played through scratched speakers. Ewan's face softened. He didn't smile, not yet, but something shifted behind his eyes. Understanding, maybe. Recognition of what survived breaking. Again? He said quietly. Yes, please. They danced 4 more songs. By the 3rd, Karen had stopped crying. By the 4th, she was smiling. Small and fragile, like something growing in concrete. Private Mackenzie watched from his guard post near the gramophone. He'd seen Ewan around town. Knew he'd lost his wife to tuberculosis in 1943. Knew he lived alone in a cottage overlooking the harbor, mending nets by hand because his deaf ear made boat work dangerous. Lotta stood with Helga and Johanna against the far wall, their borrowed dresses making them look like different people. Church ladies instead of prisoners. He's teaching her to dance, Johanna whispered. He's teaching her she's still alive, Lotta corrected. The song ended. Ewan stepped back, gave a small bow. Karen curtsied, clumsy but earnest. Thank you, she said in English. Tomorrow? Ewan asked. Same time. Colonel says Saturday dances continue. Karen nodded so hard her hair fell loose from its pins. Colonel Sinclair watched from the doorway, arms crossed, face unreadable. This was what rehabilitation looked like, apparently. German naval auxiliary and Scottish fishermen swaying to American music, both smiling like teenagers at their first dance. Tomorrow's newspaper would call it scandalous. Tonight, it was just 2 broken people remembering how to move. The gramophone played until the record ran out. Couples separated. Locals filed toward the exit, some nodding to the German women, most avoiding eye contact entirely. Mrs. Campbell stopped at the door. She wore her Campbell tartan shawl over her church dress. Her eyes found Helga across the room. She didn't wave, just nodded once. Helga nodded back. Karen walked back to her corner, still smiling. The cream dress swished around her ankles. Glenn Miller's melody echoed in her deaf father's daughter's ears. She'd danced. She'd laughed. She'd touched joy. For the first time since childhood, the future felt possible. The Nissen hut smelled like rust and damp wool. 23 women sat shoulder to shoulder on wooden benches, breath clouding the frozen air. Johanna Kruger couldn't stop shaking, not from cold, but from the announcement that morning. Special protocols for Christmas Eve. Those 3 words had emptied her stomach. She'd heard stories from other camps. Jewish prisoners forced to sing Christian hymns. Starvation rations on holy days. Isolation cells for those who refused conversion. The British called it rehabilitation. The nurses called it what comes next. Helga sat beside her, wrapped in Mrs. Campbell's tartan blanket, fingers worrying the fringe. They'll take the blankets first, she whispered. Then the extra food. Her voice cracked. Then the door rattled. Every woman froze. Metal scraped metal as the bolt slid back. The hinges screamed. Cold wind blasted through the opening, extinguishing 2 oil lamps. Corporal McTavish stepped inside. He carried something wrapped in burlap. Behind him, 3 more guards wrestled a massive shape through the doorway, branches scraping the frame, releasing the sharp green smell of fresh pine. A Christmas tree, not a pathetic branch in a tin can, a real tree, nearly 7 feet tall, still dropping needles. The guards positioned it in the corner, grunting with effort. Someone had built a wooden stand. It didn't wobble. Johanna's throat closed. McTavish unwrapped the burlap. Inside, 42 candles in small tin holders, their wicks fresh and white. He began clipping them to branches, one by one, while the German nurses sat paralyzed. The soft click of metal on wood filled the silence. Private Mackenzie entered next, carrying a box. He moved from candle to candle with matches, touching flame to wick. Tiny lights bloomed across the green. The tree became a constellation. Lotta started crying first. Just tears, no sound. McTavish reached into his coat, pulled out a fiddle, battered and scarred from years of use. He tucked it under his chin, drew the bow across the strings. The first notes of O Tannenbaum pierced the hut. Johanna's hands flew to her mouth. The melody wrapped around her chest and squeezed. She was 7 years old again, holding her father's hand in church, candles flickering on the altar. She was 12, decorating their tree in Dresden while her mother sang. She was 16, believing in a 1,000-year future that would never come. The bow moved. The notes climbed. O Tannenbaum, we troos en deine Blätter. McTavish's voice joined the fiddle, rough Scottish accent mangling the German words but singing them, actually singing them, not mocking, not forcing, just offering. Johanna broke. The sob ripped out of her so violently she doubled over, her stomach convulsed, vomit splashed into her lap, thin and bitter, nothing but tea and bread. She gagged again, heaving, unable to stop crying long enough to breathe. Karen grabbed her shoulders. "Johanna!" But McTavish kept playing. The other guards joined in, their voices blending with the fiddle. They'd practiced this, hoarded candles for weeks, learned the German words phonetically. For them, for the enemy. Helga's voice cracked into the song next. "Du grünst, nicht nur zur Sommerzeit." She couldn't finish the line, just held the tartan blanket to her face and wept into the wool. Lotta rose to her feet, trembling. Her mouth opened. The words came out broken. Nein, auch im Winter, wenn es schneit. One by one, the German nurses stood. 23 voices joined 20 Scottish ones. The languages tangled. Some sang in German, some in English. Nobody cared. The harmony wobbled and cracked and rebuilt itself. Johanna lifted her head, vomit still dripping from her chin. Across the hut, young Private Mackenzie watched her with red-rimmed eyes. The boy who'd lost his brother at Arnhem, who'd given Lotta extra beef, who was crying now, openly, while singing about evergreen trees. She reached for the hand of the woman beside her, found it already, reaching back. The candles threw wild shadows on the curved metal walls. 42 tiny flames against the December darkness. Someone had used their tobacco rations to buy them. Someone had risked punishment, smuggling them in. The song ended. Nobody moved. The silence felt like prayer. McTavish lowered his fiddle. His voice came out hoarse. "We've got one more." He struck up Silent Night. This time, both languages wove together from the start. Stille Nacht, heilige Nacht. Silent night, holy night. The melodies matched perfectly. Same notes, same rhythm, just different words for the same desperate hope. Johanna felt hands clasp hers from both sides. Looked left. Karen, tears streaming down her face, lips moving soundlessly. Looked right. A Scottish guard she didn't know, middle-aged, missing 2 fingers, gripping her hand like he was drowning. The tree blazed. Wax dripped onto pine needles, releasing the smell of honey and smoke. Someone's voice broke on the high notes. Someone else laughed, a wet, shattered sound, and kept singing. When it finished, Corporal McTavish set down his fiddle. He pulled something else from his coat, a flask. "Scottish tradition," he said in halting German. "Share whiskey on Christmas Eve." He took a sip, passed it to the nearest nurse, Helga, and nodded. She drank, gasped, passed it to Lotta. The flask circled the room, German to Scot to German, lips touching the same metal. When it reached Johanna, the whiskey burned her raw throat, but she swallowed hard, tasted peat and fire. The flask completed its circle and returned to McTavish empty. "Frohe Weihnachten," he said. "Merry Christmas." 23 voices answered in unison. Merry Christmas. Outside, snow began falling through the highland darkness. Inside, 42 candles burned down to stubs, throwing light on faces that couldn't stop crying, couldn't stop smiling, couldn't reconcile what was happening. They were supposed to be enemies. They were supposed to hate each other. Instead, they were standing in a freezing metal hut, holding hands across uniforms, watching a Christmas tree blaze with hoarded light while their voices tangled into something neither side had words for. Mrs. Campbell appeared in the doorway, snow dusting her gray hair. She carried a basket covered with cloth, pulled back the fabric to reveal shortbread, still warm, wrapped in checkered napkins. She moved through the room, pressing pieces into German and Scottish hands alike. When she reached Helga, she cupped the young woman's face. "My boys would have loved this," she whispered, singing together. Helga kissed the old woman's weathered palm. The shortbread tasted like butter and sugar and salt from all their tears. Someone started humming, "O Come, All Ye Faithful." The humming grew into singing. 3 songs became 4, became 5. Private Mackenzie found Lotta in the crowd, pressed something into her hand, a photograph, bent at the corners. His brother, in uniform, grinning at the camera. "Keep it," he said. "So, you remember." "Remember what?" He didn't say. "Remember the boy I lost. Remember we're all somebody's children. Remember this night when enemies became something else." The candles guttered out one by one. The guards didn't move to leave. The nurses didn't retreat to their bunks. They stood in the dimming light, holding the moment as long as they could. When the last candle died, McTavish struck one match, held it up. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked. Johanna nodded, still tasting vomit and whiskey and shortbread, still feeling the ghost pressure of hands in hers. "Same time," she whispered. The match went out. In the darkness, someone laughed, genuine and light. Someone else joined in, then another. The laughter built like the singing had, uncontrollable and necessary. They'd expected punishment, isolation. Cruelty returned for cruelty. Instead, they got candles, carols, clasped hands in the freezing dark. Johanna wiped her mouth with her sleeve, looked at the empty space where the tree stood, still smelling of pine and honey wax. She didn't have words for what had changed, only that something had. Johanna's boots clicked against the frozen dirt path. Her fingers gripped the folded letter so tight the paper cut into her palm. December's sun bounced off the windows of Colonel Sinclair's office. She'd rehearsed the German words 50 times. English only 7. The secretary didn't look up. "He's expecting you." The door opened before she could knock. Sinclair stood by the window, still wearing yesterday's exhausted expression. The carol singing had run until 3 in the morning. His eyes were bloodshot. "Miss Kruger," he gestured to the chair. She sat. The leather was cold through her donated skirt. "Your message said this was urgent." He pulled reading glasses from his pocket. "I assume this concerns yesterday's festivities." Johanna placed the letters on his desk. 3 envelopes, one addressed to Dresden, returned unopened with addressee deceased stamped in red. One to Berlin, similarly marked. The third still sealed, addressed to a mother she'd never met in Hamburg. "I want stay." The English felt wrong in her mouth. "I want, ich möchte, I refuse, go Germany." Sinclair's glasses slipped down his nose. He caught them. "I'm sorry?" "Repatriation. I refuse." She'd practiced that word until her tongue bled. You feed enemy when hungry. You sing with enemy at Christmas. You give blankets when cold. You teach dancing when sad. Her voice cracked. "My people teach me kill you. You people teach me what is good human." The office went silent except for the radiator hissing. Sinclair picked up the Dresden letter, read the death stamp, put it down like it burned. "Miss Kruger, the legal complications. I have no family, no Germany left." She pointed at the letters. "Fiancé dead in Berlin. Mother dead in Dresden. What I go back to? Rubble, hate, people who Make me nurse soldiers who bomb your children? Tears fell. She didn't wipe them. Here, I learn what my father never teach. Kindness from enemy is louder than orders from friend. Someone knocked. The secretary's voice. Sir, there's press outside. Sinclair's face went white. What? Local papers. Someone rang them. They're asking about German refusals. Johanna stood. I tell them myself. Absolutely not. But she was already opening the door. 4 journalists stood in the hallway, cameras ready. She recognized the man from the Oban Times who'd photographed the tartan weaving. Miss, is it true you're refusing to go home? The words came in broken English, loud enough that nurses in the common room heard through the walls. Germany, not home now. Home is where people show you humanity when you enemy. I want stay Scotland. I want work. I want repay kindness. Flashbulbs popped. Someone wrote frantically. But you served the Wehrmacht. I serve wounded, not ideology. Her hands shook. You think I Nazi? I am nurse. I hold dying boys who cry for mothers. British boys in Norway same. Cry same. Bleed same. Your Corporal McTavish show me this truth. His fiddle play my childhood song. He give me back pieces of soul I lose in war. More flashbulbs. A woman reporter stepped forward. What would you say to Scottish families who lost sons? Johanna looked at her. Really looked. I say I sorry. I say I understand. I say Mrs. Campbell, she lose 2 sons. She give me blanket when I deserve nothing. She teach me weaving when I only teach destruction. If she can forgive, maybe others can choose forgive too. The hallway filled with nurses. Helga stood in her Campbell tartan. Karen clutched Ewan's hand. He'd been visiting, against protocol. Lotta held Private Mackenzie's brother's photograph. Helga stepped forward. I also refuse repatriation. The reporters spun. More notebooks flipped open. Karen raised her hand like a schoolgirl. I stay with Ewan. He teach me dancing. I want learn more. Within 10 minutes, 17 nurses signed their names on Johanna's petition. Sinclair stood in his doorway, watching his careful rehabilitation program explode into something uncontrollable. The Oban Times ran it front page, Nazi nurses refuse to go home. The Glasgow Herald picked it up. Enemy captives choose Scotland over fatherland. By New Year's, London papers were screaming, coddling the enemy or rehabilitation success. Mrs. Campbell read the backlash over breakfast. Someone had spray-painted traitor on her cottage wall. The church had asked her to stop attending. She put on her coat, walked to the newspaper office, demanded space for a letter. It ran 2 days later. My sons died fighting Germans. I have more right than most to hate, but hate is what started this war. These girls nursed wounded, British included. They chose mercy when ordered to fight. If we punish mercy, we become the monsters we claim to oppose. Let them stay. Let them work. Let them prove that enemies can become neighbors. The response was immediate. 53 locals signed a counter-petition supporting the nurses. Shopkeepers in Oban offered jobs. The local hospital said they needed staff. But London balked. Legal tangles, immigration quotas, public outcry from veterans groups. Ewan proposed to Karen in February. Did it properly, on one knee in the common room with a ring his grandmother had worn. Karen said yes in 3 languages. That photograph went viral in Scotland. The wedding was scheduled for June, conditional on Karen's status. Sinclair worked miracles through bureaucratic channels. By summer 1946, 12 nurses received refugee status, not POWs, not deportees, refugees choosing Britain as sanctuary. Johanna moved to Oban, worked in the hospital for 3 years, saved every penny. In 1949, she opened a bakery on the waterfront, combined German precision with Scottish ingredients, plum cakes with Highlands berries, stolen with local whiskey soaking. The smell drew customers who'd protested her arrival. Old Mr. Douglas, who'd lost 3 nephews at Normandy, was her first regular. Came every Saturday for apple strudel. Never mentioned the war. Christmas 1950 arrived cold and clear. The invitation had gone out months before. Reunion at Camp 26. The military had decommissioned it, left it to rot. But someone maintained the clearing. Johanna drove up in a borrowed truck, her bakery's logo painted on the side. Helga and her husband arrived with their 2-year-old daughter, Fiona, named for Mrs. Campbell. Karen and Ewan brought their infant son, James. Corporal McTavish was there, older, grayer, fiddle case in hand. Private Mackenzie came with his new wife. Colonel Sinclair traveled from Edinburgh. They'd brought a tree. Not as big as 1945's, but real. Decorations hung from branches. Some German ornaments the nurses had kept, some Scottish. Mrs. Campbell set up her loom in the corner, showed little Fiona how to thread the shuttle. The child's hands, half German, half Scottish, wove blue and green together. McTavish rosined his bow, started O Tannenbaum, slow and deliberate. The voices that joined were different now, aged, marked by 5 years of peace, German and Scottish blended, no longer tentative. Helga's alto harmonized with her husband's bass. Karen sang soprano while Ewan held their son. They switched to Auld Lang Syne, sang it in both languages, mixing verses, laughing when they forgot words. Snow started falling through the broken roof. Flakes landed on the Christmas tree candles, hissing into steam. Johanna stood between Mrs. Campbell and Sinclair, watching the children play in the hut that had once held frightened prisoners. Fiona toddled over to James, offered him a wooden shuttle. He gummed it, giggling. "Should we take a photograph?" someone asked. They gathered around the tree. 3 generations. Former guards, former prisoners, their children. The camera clicked. That photo hung in Johanna's bakery until she died in 1987. In her will, she left the shop to Mr. Douglas's grandson, who'd been her apprentice for 12 years. The newspaper clipping from that Christmas reunion was framed beside it. Former enemies gather at abandoned camp, not as veterans and victims, as family. Underneath, in Johanna's handwriting, home is where they sing your songs, even when you were the enemy. The bakery still operates in Oban, still makes Stollen with whiskey, still uses Johanna's recipes, and every Christmas they play O Tannenbaum on the radio, in German and English, blended together like voices in a freezing Nissen hut where enemies became something better, something human.